Politics and popular culture in a post-civil rights era. For African Americans, partly because of their marginal status and often violent exclusion from the realms of formal politics, popular culture was an integral and important aspect of the making of politics throughout the pre-civil rights era and the civil rights era itself. Quote, a time when it was almost impossible, unquote. Film historian Donald Bogle contends, open quote, to keep politics and aesthetics apart, close quote. Indeed, in the absence of any significant space for black participation in the institutionalized realm outside of perhaps machine politics. Huh? Huh? In this context, the cultural products that mainstream outlets created and propagated, such as the minstrel show of the 19th century, films including The Birth of a Nation, Al Jolson's Jazz Singer, Gone the Wind, and the radio version of Amos and Andy, often provoked criticism and outrage on the part of blacks who interpreted the promotion of images they saw as unfavorable, as a roadblock to their struggle for equal citizenship. Open quote. Art was at one time the only voice we had to declare our humanity, close quote. The actor, playwright, and director Ozzie Davis suggested by the late 1990s. Furthermore, he asserted, open quote, art among us blacks has always been a statement about our condition, and therefore it has always been political, close quote, making specific reference to Marian Anderson's concert at the Lincoln Memorial on April 16, 1939. After she prevented from After she was prevented from playing constitutional hall by the Daughters of the American Revolution, Davis wrote, it was for me an act of definition as well as defiance, with its own with its with its own salute to the black struggle. It it married in my mind forever the performing arts as a weapon in the struggle for freedom. It made a connection that for me and thousands of other artists had never been served. It was a proclamation and commitment. That voice focused me and gave me my marching orders. It reminded me that whatever I said and whatever I did as an artist was an integral part of my people's struggle to be free. Close quote. Given the recognized connection between the cultural and political realms, it is not surprising that both W.E.B. Du Bois and Walter White of the NAACP wrote novels. The labor leader A. Philip Randolph initially came to New York City inspired by Du Bois' pioneering fusion of culture and politics, the souls of black folk to become engaged in radical politics and to become a stage actor, or that politics leaders of the pre-civil rights era felt comfortable and indeed obligated to comment on African American cultural efforts. As a consequence, actors involved in protests and electoral activity made frequent efforts to shape the contributions, or, if necessary, silence the voices of individuals working in various cultural arenas. In a 1928 Negro editorial, Marcus Garvey stated, our race, within recent years, has developed a new group of writers who have been prostituting their intelligence under the direction of the white man to bring out and show up the worst traits of our people. Specifically, Garvey castigated Paul Robeson for his participation in the film version of Showboat and for allowing his genius to appear in pictures and plays that tend to dishonor, mimic, open quote, yeah, discredit and abuse the cultural attainments of the black race, close quote, and characterize Claude McKay's vernacular based and sexually explicit home to Harlem as a damnable libel against the Negro. Du Bois, co founder of the NAACP, was also among the most ferocious critics of McKay's novel, and his review in the NAACP's Crisis, wherein he reported that the book nauseates me, open quote, and after the dirtier parts of its filth, I felt distinctly like taking a bath, close quote, prompted McKay to reply that the boy was too removed from open quote, from contact with real life, close quote, to make such judgments and to contend that the boy had mistaken open quote, the art of life for nonsense and was trying to pass our propaganda as life in art, close quote. Indeed, by that point, the boy developed his own clear views about the proper relationships between art and politics. In a piece published in 1926 entitled Criteria of Negro Art, he argued, all art is propaganda, and ever must be, despite the waning of the pursuits. I stand in utter shamelessness and say that whatever art I have for written, for writing, has been used always for propaganda, for gaining the right of black folk to love and enjoy. I do not care damn for any art that is not used for propaganda. The agony and ecstasy, popular culture and African American exceptionalism. Although many artists may claim that their work is not political, nothing about politics, asserted Luther Vandross, arguably the most gifted male vocalist of our generation. Open quote, I don't write about politics, and that they are driven purely by aesthetic considerations, or that they seek to entertain and provide escape from open quote reality for the audience. Political intention adheres to every cultural production. Sometimes such stances are a response to the perception that politics narrowly understood, that is, formal politics and the individuals who operate in that domain, is inherently corrupt and corrupting and devoid of real substance. In this spirit, South African vocalist Miriam Makeba states, open quote, I've always said, I don't sing politics, I sing truth, close quote. No, open quote, quote within a quote. I sang about the suffering we endured. It was about politics, it wasn't political, it was honest. Artists might also claim not to be political to avoid the unwanted scrutiny of the state and other associated authorities in the realm of formal politics. As often, these kinds of assertions are meant to refer to the artist's disengagement from the issues driving formal political activity, although songs about romance and novels and family life, for example, certainly are political in a broad sense. Love itself, sub, subversive gift, is an important public good, and loving is a significant political act, particularly among those stigmatized and marked as unworthy of love and incapable of deep commitment. The suggestions that art and politics should be divorced also depend on the notion of the aesthetic as a realm that, by definition, should not be implicated with the political. According to 1994, critic Arlene Crook disparaged the work of dancer, choreographer Billy T. Jones, and specifically his piece Still Here, focusing on the devastation wrought by the AIDS crisis as utilitarian art, inspired by 60s permissiveness, the campaigns of the multiculturalists, the moral guardians, and the minority groups. Close quote. Through a review, Crook implied that art must be separated from quote unquote community outreach, close quote, and that there is something improper about infusing art with political intention. In contrast, it can be argued that the quote art for art's sake opposition position depends on the arguable false and impossible dichotomy. Political communication is not is not divorced from the same kinds of considerations that determine our responses to artistic work. Imagine Malcolm X, for instance, without his comic timing and sense of humor. There are aesthetic grammars that determine the relative success of political interactions and the impact of political communication in the cultural realm. Science, style, and performances whose qualities transcend the political and artistic realms. In other words, the suggestion that aesthetics cannot be divorced from politics does not imply that we cannot make aesthetic judgment regarding creative and political work. The point is that aesthetic judgment should not be confined to the artistic realm and cannot be detached from political considerations. Accordingly, we should not resist to we should not resist the erasure of the lines distinguishing the politics of poetry and the poetics of the political. Intentional silences also have significance to say nothing, so just acceptance of or satisfaction with existing agreements and implicitly represents the expression of a political preference. If we agree that politics is, among other things, a contest about what matters and ought to be subject to consideration and debate, we recognize both the assertion of the aesthetic and the suggestion that the art is a self-contained realm, open quote, above, close quote, politics as political arguments of a particular normative type, similar to the corresponding claims that are made with regard to science. The specific relationship between popular culture and black politics also has to be understood in the broader context of uncertainty about the status of black citizenship and specifically the questions of which African Americans are permanent outsiders. The penultimate American author. Among the allegedly queer characteristics of black political behavior that provoke this type of reaction are the supposed overdependence of blacks on male charismatic leadership of Marcus Garvey, Adam Clayton Powell, Jr., Malcolm X, Martin Luther King Jr., Jesse Jackson. The implication that blacks, unlike other groups, who vote as a bloc for the Democratic Party, and that this is somehow irrational and evidence as of a lack of sophistication, the ritualistic engagement in demonstrations, protest marches, and perhaps riots, and the ongoing significance of the black churches in the making of black politics. Regarding the last aspect, there has been a long running debate concerning the merits of African American religiosity and the predominant role of the quote, black church, close quote. This discourse can be traced back to the Marxist supposition that religion merely assisted in the obfuscation of class realities and prevented the working class from understanding the true nature of their situation. The opiate theory, as Frederick C. Harris writes, insists that Afro Christianity promotes otherworldliness functions as an instrument of political pacification, close quote, and rejects the assumption that the inspiration theory, which would include the civil rights movement among the political accomplishments of the Black Church, the frequency with which churches are targeted and destroyed by opponents of the civil rights movement obviously supports this interpretation. It is not surprising then that Du Bois would claim, quote, our religion holds us in superstition, close quote, or that black ministers would be depicted as hustlers and sellouts in the films of Oscar Micheaux. Example, Within Our Gates, 1919, and Body and Soul, 1924, starred Paul Robert Robeson, a minister's son, and the comedy of Pigmeat Markham, example, The Crap Shooting Rev. Majority black church did not support Martin Luther King's leadership, adds Houston Baker, in reference to the situation after World War II. Indeed, the multi-million member National Baptist Convention relentlessly upholds a civil rights agenda. There's also, of course, Adolf Reed's Jr. depiction of the implications of a black politics driven by black religiosity and a dependence on faith-based institutions. In a discussion of Jesse Jackson's 1984 campaign for presidency, quote, this model of clerical authority is fundamentally anti-participatory and anti-democratic. In fact, it is grounded on a denial of the rationality of democratic participation, that democratic participation requires, close quote. At another point, he observes, quote, exceptionalist approaches to black politics typically are fed by the mystique of black churchliness and religiosity, which postulates and particularly which postulates a particularly racial bias of participation and representation, close quote. The suggestion that popular culture and the various manifestations of, quote, Saturday night's activities, close quote, should be seen as relevant to black politics provokes many of the same reactions and potentially legitimate concerns as of assertions regarding the political significance of black churches, black church life, and Sunday morning rituals. At the most basic level, there is a contention that an emphasis on black popular culture and as a political medium encourages exceptionalist understanding of African American political behavior. In this normative matrix, investigations and certain celebrations of any linkages between the two realms might reinforce the notion that blacks lie outside of the standard masculinist American mainstream. The ideology of race, as Horton Spillers notes, quote, is founded upon the fundamental assumption that one is not a man, or more broadly, a Valentin Modimbi has observed, quote, the colonial library disseminates the concept of deviation as the best symbol of the idea of Africa. Quote, normal, end quote, Americans then made their politics by collecting information through rational and regularized process. Sorry. Blacks, in contrast, pursue means that are irregular, inappropriate, probably ineffective, and possibly in the eyes of some, example, the always anxious comprador class, improper, embarrassing, and shameful. On this point, Reed contends that a focus on popular culture, quote, boils down to nothing more than an insistence that authentic, meaningful political engagement for Black Americans is expressed not in relation to the institutions of political authority, the state, or the workplace, but in clandestine significance assigned to apparently apolitical rituals. Black people, according to this logic, don't mobilize through overt collective action. They do it surreptitiously when they look like they're just dancing. This is don't worry, be happy. Politics, certainly. Close quote, certainly. To the extent that an emphasis on the cultural realm can encourage facile commodification, accommodation, and incorporation into status quo arrangements as the intriguingly expressive, the exotic, and the interesting and entertaining other. Such a strategy can produce conservative outcomes. Claims about the political salience of Black popular culture also raise concerns about the degree to which these practices sorry, can be routinized. Although performances need not be insecure or merely calculating, and sometimes simply a matter of amplification, making one's intentions and message as clear as possible. Popular culture thrives on and indeed demands nuance. That is, what is DADAESQUE? DADAESQUE. DADA, Dadaesque. DADAESQUE. Huh? Ambiguity and contrapuntally as it resists fixedness in its moves between the grounded and the fantastic. Quote, the word that I do frequently falls in the minds of most people into the realms of fiction called fantastic or mythical or magical or unbelievable. The novelist Toni Morrison suggests, quote, unquote, I'm not comfortable with these labels, close quote. Further reading Ralph Ellison's contents, quote, the novel at its best demands a sort of complexity of vision that politics doesn't like, close quote. While intentions are not always easily known, the effects of a vote or a decision can be more clearly ascertained. The inclination of formal politics toward a quantified and bordered, structured, ordered, policeable, and, disciplined is in fundamental tension with popular culture's willingness to embrace disturbance, to engage apparently maddening, to sustain often slippery frameworks of intention that act subliminally. If not explicitly, on distinct and overlapping cognitive registers, and to acknowledge meaning to those spaces where speechlessness is a common occurrence. Now, start so 34 and 24, that was something with the 68, 1 hour 4 minutes. I'll try that. Moreover, political willingness not to know is frequent preference for experience of explanation and is deployment of omission as method, and silence as meaning, as in the work of Ahmad Jamal, Miles Davis, and Shirley Horn, mark its expressions and manifestations of as distinct from the ambitions of the formally political. Finally, the ways the performative challenges the truth claims of the formal. So, finally, the ways the formative challenges the truth claims of the formally political and cast it as itself just another mode of performance explain many of the disjunctions between the two realms and the characteristic disavowal of any intimate connection with the culture on the part of the political narrowly understood. But you understand so far, boys? Huh?
You understand?
What you understand about it?
You so far?
Yeah.
What do we need this popular culture? On the reading also. It's not true.
Bamboozle. Bamboozlement down. Popular culture leading us to bamboozlement.
Politics. Including politics, isn't it?
It is specifically because of this disjunction. It is specifically because of this disjunction between the political and cultural realms that one of the arguments Ellison and his intellectual progeny raise is so unconvincing. Sam, what do we call him? Sabi call him. And pauses. You got something personal?
No one that makes sense.
Okay. I check on. I'm going to read here.
Like it now.
Still difficult. Glasses better, it's still difficult. Evidence of the implausibility of this position included descendant culture and political traditions that have developed in Memphis. The blues affectations of the late race baiting Lee Atwater and the code switching abilities of former President Bill Clinton. Indeed, Juneteenth, Ellison's posthumous novel, speaks to this kind of possibility. Quote, we do have institutions, Ellison asserted in the early 1970s. Quote, we have a constitution and a bill of rights.
Yes, sir.
And we have jazz.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
We give you the painkiller already. You know, your meds just now.
Okay.
I'm going to start this off. I'm going to start this off.
Yeah.
Start this off for the night, right?
Mm.
I'm boss. That's the market. Page 12. Okay, guys. In Search of the Black Fantastic by Richard Iton. My cousin, big professor at which school again? University of Chicago? Big professor at University of Chicago. And sprinkling ashes in Motherland Gully. And dedicate this book to mama, my grandmother. And pass away the ashes sprinkle around Motherland Gully Free Gate. That's it, guys. Love you. Bye.
I should turn that mango out.
Turn on mango up.